And then another framework that I'm working with is called procedural justice. It's from Tyler with his book called Why People Obey the Law. And basically, this is sort of intuitive, but he argues that trust in government can increase citizens' willingness to comply with the law. And that was only a part of his argument, but that's the main point that I took away from it for this project. And then I also read from some other people that were talking about Tyler's work that, compliance can probably actually be considered a type of collective action because people can sometimes free ride off of the compliance of law by not complying with the law while also gaining the benefits of people that do comply with the law. Think of people that don't pay their taxes but still gain the benefits from welfare programs and stuff. And so that is represented graphically there. And then, so trust influences both collective actions and compliance with the law, but how trust affects collective action also, in return, affects compliance with the law on top of that. And so, here are some of the most important hypotheses that I was working with this semester. I have one, high levels of trust will increase the probability that Norwegian farmers will comply with environmental regulations. And then hypothesis 2, its high levels of social capital will increase the probability that Norwegian farmers will comply with environmental regulations. And 3, farmers who submit definitions of sustainable agriculture that are more directly concerned with future generations will have higher levels of compliancy. It's sort of jargony, but it'll make a whole lot more sense once we get into the actual survey that I did. And so, summing up the framework, this is basically the model that I hypothesized. This is what I came up with for my model. So you have a lot of different interacting factors, a lot of variables working with, but you have all the independent variables of social capital, norms of reciprocity, networks, trust, collective action, affecting the dependent variable, which is compliance with environmental law. And so, getting into the methods, I was actually this past summer able to receive a lot of help from a part of the Food and Agriculture Ministry called the Norwegian Agricultural Authority, or Statens Landbruksforvaltning. And from email correspondence, I was easily able to get a hold of 1,630 email addresses of farmers who had applied for subsidies in August of 2009. And they only just asked I pick out a couple different categories that they could pick email addresses from. And so I picked some of the most common being wheat, potatoes, oat, cattle, dairy, and goats production. One thing to note, which will be more important as we get into the results, is cattle and dairy wasn't distinguished. It isn't distinguishable in subsidy applications. It's the way that it's phrased, it says cattle and dairy of all ages. So I think for Norwegians a lot of times they think a cow is a cow, even though we might not necessarily think that in the US, where we usually distinguish between dairy and cattle. So yeah, I got all those email addresses, and then I was able to use SurveyMonkey then, which is an online survey distributor, to send out email addresses to all 1,630 of these guys and girls to do an anonymous survey. And the questions asked things about to measure social capital, their willingness to comply with environmental regulations, more general information about their methods of agriculture. And then going back to the first part of this whole research project, what are their conceptions, what are their definitions of sustainable agriculture? And about this part of the research project, I asked the question, hva legger du i begrepet bærekraftig landbruk? And I categorized it in two ways to try and take a couple different stabs at it. from the responses that I got. And one was looking at the core meaning of what exactly does, what is the main point of their definition? And I'll get into some of the different categories that I came up with in a little bit. But the second way of doing that was a more measurable sort of way that I could put a scale to. And I have the different parts of the scale here, where I was able to look at the level of concern that these definitions have for future generations, referring back to the original definition of sustainability. And so you have, I don't know, a lot of them did not answer, or they left it blank, or said, I don't know. Some of them even answered sustainability in English. But one would be no sustainable or future criteria. And what I mean by sustainable criteria is basically that they included at least one of the three different groups of sustainability, which would be the ecological, economical, or societal sustainability. And so number two would be sustainable criteria with no future criteria, sustainable and future criteria. And then four was the extreme, where you have specific mentions of future generations or other people in the future that wouldn't necessarily include the farmer. And so the second part of the project was a statistical analysis where I was doing a lot of stats. And if anyone has ever worked with SPSS, it can be a pain in the butt. But I was looking at correlations, and then I also did a linear regression analysis to test the overall model and the strength of my new theoretical framework. And so let's get into the results. A little bit of background information. As of last week, when I started finally putting this project together, there was 114 respondents. It's gone up since then. The background information on these 114, they age from 24 to 67, and 83% are male, 17% are female, which is relatively representative of farming in Norway right now. And there was at least one respondent from every county, which I was really excited about that. There's 19 livable counties in Norway, and so I thought that was really cool. Also, as I asked a question about their education in farming, 71% said that they learned most of their skills in agriculture while they were growing up on the farm with their family. And then 23% said that they attended Landbruksuniversitet, Landbruksskole eller agronom, which basically implies that they had attended some sort of higher level learning institution specifically on agriculture, or as opposed to the other 5.5% that said they learned through friends or were self-taught or some other more informal type of learning. And then for the representation of the type of production, of the ones that I chose to look at, I asked them again, what sorts of production are they involved in? And it seemed pretty representative, except for the 48% either cattle or dairy. And that was a bit challenging because that's not necessarily the case that half the farmers in Norway have cows on their farm. So that was a little bit underrepresentative. And I'll come back to that later because it did influence my data. And then I asked the question, vad skriver bäst intressant för lantbruket? And this was probably the most shocking result of one question, because 85.5% describe their production as organic, which is definitely not representative of the population of farmers in Norway. It would actually probably should be flipped with the conventional number to be more representative. So I was not very confident in that question, so I just tossed it out. But since a lot of the other data was very representative, I decided that it was still pretty good to look at. And so now, getting to the definition of sustainable agriculture, I have I came up with 10 different ones, 5 of them being pretty common. And then a couple that a minority, strong minority of them also reported, but didn't really fit at all into any of the other major 5. You have continuation, survival, stewardship of the land. A large amount of them said they don't know. The 5th one was profitability, and these are alternative food, farming systems, food security, a comprehensive, very inclusive, very in detail definition. There was also long-term and general definitions, of one that said it was about morals, specifically in their definition. And I wanted to look at the top 3 really quick and explain what those categories mean and a couple examples of those. And so the first one is continuation, which is, those definitions were very concerned about farming as an activity being continued and continue on farming. So one example is "Gjør det dyrke så høstes over mange år" from Farmer 37. And the second one, at man kan drive landbruk på en måte som gjør at man kan fortsette med det i all framtid uten at naturen skades. In many ways, these definitions are very different, but at the same time, they're also very concerned about continuing farming as the main point of their definition. And so the second one is about survival, i.e. Surviving economically as a farmer. So basically long-term farming existence, where you're concerned with earning a livable wage. And so these ones look more like this. Et landbruk som gir en bonde økonomisk evne til å fortsette å være bonde. And vi må få betingelser slik at vi kan leve av gården alene. Very much about being able to earn enough to actually be a farmer from their farming. And then the third category was stewardship of the land, which is looking more, those definitions looked more specifically at the natural and physical aspects of their farm, not necessarily about themselves or the economy of their farming, but the actual physical parts. So, et landbruk som ivaretar ressursene, og sørger for at matjorda ikke blir tappet for næringsstoffer, ei heller tilfelle for mye i form av overforbruk av gjødsel, which these are talking about the resources, the fertilizers, and the inputs and outputs of their farming. And at the second way that I categorized sustainable agriculture, I tried to make it measurable and trying to get, if you've ever done statistics, try and get that normal bell curve. I sort of accomplished that, not really. I think if I were able to get more respondents, you would see a better curve than this. But then the mode was the sustainable criteria without talking specifically about future generations. And then going on to the other questions in my survey and the statistical analysis, I asked a question about what is the most important reason for complying with environmental law to you. And this was also surprising. A large majority of them said that it's morally right, that there are moral implications to complying with the law. And there was other options too that I thought would be more common, including one that says that it's more profitable, or to receive subsidies, something that they are actually gaining benefit from their farming. And we'll come back to how this interacts with the model in a little bit.